So we're being called to order. Let me call the roll for those present. Anita Rankin,
Present.
Ilya Sloan,
Present.
Siri Trumbull,
Present.
Alex Oberlich.
He's muted.
Alex, you're muted. Can you respond? I'll go on to Drew Cook, who has
Present.
voiced being here, and we have a visitor, Guy Dobbins, and then Chris and Stephen here from Norris Design and the city, respectively. Let me ask if you all had a chance to see the minutes from last meeting. And if so, are there any changes you'd like to propose? Hearing none, I'm assuming that everybody is in agreement. Would you respond by saying aye?
You need to do a motion, sorry, and a second.
All right. Somebody propose a motion.
I move that we accept the minutes as is from the last meeting.
This is Drew Cook. I second.
Thank you. All in favor? Anita?
Aye.
I'm also an aye. Ilya?
Aye.
Siri?
Aye.
Drew?
Aye.
And Alex, are you with us?
I'll text him that he's muted.
If Alex doesn't talk, I can't count him. I mean, you still have a quorum, but I can't count him.
Can you unmute him since you muted him?
I could not unmute him. He needs to unmute himself. And for the record, anybody else that has a lot of background noise, I'll mute you too. So you just have to know where the unmute button is. It's pops up just like your start video. On my screen, it's down at the bottom where it says mute. There's a little microphone looking thing. And
For
you
some
can,
of us, it's at the top.
Okay, I found it. There it
oh, you
is.
found it.
It was blanked out. Now it popped up. Okay. Aye.
Very good. No objections? Then the minutes are accepted. Here is the moment for the call to audience. I think, Guy, welcome.
Thank you.
We did not receive any written call to the audience.
Thank you. So let's move on to item number 4, the review of, it's a courtesy review of the proposal from Norris Design in conjunction with the business owners and also
You're freezing.
with Fletcher McCusker's group.
Rio Nuevo.
What?
Rio Nuevo.
Yes. So I think the best thing to do is, if there are no immediate questions, to lead in to have Chris speak to us about this. And I must say, I had a hard time getting a clear, still image of the design work. It was really a jumpy program, unfortunately. So it was difficult to make the connections very clearly. But I was at that meeting and as others were, and saw some of the presentation that you gave, Chris. So would you like to go forward with this?
I would, sure. Welcome, everyone. Which presentation were you at? I've done this
1,000 times.
the show a few times in the last week or so. 2 weeks. So
This was several weeks ago at the Art Museum.
And at City Hall.
oh, you were remote for that meeting?
I don't think everybody was.
No. Well, let me jump into it here as far as, let me pull up my screen. I'll share what we have for you guys. Let me know if you can't see that. It's the courthouse building with some really bright letters on it. We all good?
Good.
All right. So I think as you noted, Susan, this presentation hasn't changed a lot. There's been some minor tweaks here and there, but nothing really substantial other than starting to dial into details on how a couple of features are being constructed in the field. I'm going to kind of do this version of this a little out of order of what I've done before, just to give you guys some context of what is going on versus just jumping right into the plan. So those of you who haven't seen it, I'll see here, I should be in this file. Jump ahead just to this page, just to give a little context of where we're talking about, and that there's 9 main project areas that are not necessarily all contiguous, but are very much in proximity to each other, located within the historic El Presidio neighborhood. I'm not 100% sure if Site 8, the La Placia or the Hakame Plaza, is necessarily in the historic neighborhood, but it's still one of the sites for this project. And I'm going to skip ahead instead of going through all of the spaces. I want to skip just right to the end of what I have in these slides, and because I think it gives a better kind of general overview of the context and some of the features that are used throughout all of these sites. So give me a second to scroll through some spaces. Let the computer catch up. So I'll start here with this site. This is the front of the El Presidio Historic Museum. We're all likely familiar with this site. This is one of the main areas of the project. It's actually site 1 on the list, so it's high value. And here's a before shot, and there's an after shot of what we're conceptually looking at for the improvements in this space. A built element with fixed shade, some planters around it. It's a deck style, so it's like the shared space eating areas that are kind of propagating downtown, made of mostly weathered or painted steel and wood. The wood's a little bright in this photo, but I have a feeling at install it's going to be a little bright like this and weather out as time takes it a little bit. Large planters to define edges with trees and landscape. Backless benches in strategic areas, and down at the bottom you can see there's some asphalt paint art being used to define some corner spaces, create a little pedestrian refuge and a little traffic calming. Those patterns and colors are going to be directly tied back to the historic dome on the courthouse. So there'll be a geometric pattern, browns, greens, golds, colors in that palette to blend with the neighborhood and with the context of the space. So this is a pretty general overview of what that one main space would be. If we use these ideas in more than one spot. The other image I wanted to show you is a before and after of Tejas, which is a pretty dynamic change to this space. I think we all know this space pretty well. It's wide, but there's some restrictions as to what we can and can't do with that space. So our vision really is to take this space and redefine the parking, just tighten it up a little bit, keep it all as is. Add some planters to get some vertical planting and some shade. Create some color variation within the spaces with the corners for some pedestrian space and to traffic calm a little bit. The main vision in here really is to create a space that can have multiple uses. If we take out the parking meters along here and add a kiosk, a pay kiosk on it, that allows the opportunity to raise these poles up and add some lighting into this area. So they're weathered steel, they're temporary, they just mount right over the top of the existing parking meter poles. We figure is a good adaptive reuse in here. A couple additional benches, some stripes in the street that line up with the doors of the existing shops in there to highlight them, give them a little bit of activation, kind of just celebrate them a little bit. But one thing we decided in this image to show is a little bit of activity in the street. The street is really prime for having temporary, activities on the weekends. A couple of A-frames on the ends would, close that off and maybe have it tie back to the historic museum or to some of the other historic spaces in the area a little better and have a little bit more group activation. So the main space in here really is about keeping the material palette moving. So you can tell the materials are similar through these two images. Colors are similar, uses are similar. And we think that this palette is not obtrusive to the neighborhood and not at the same time trying to be so mimicky of historic that it looks fake or looks inauthentic. So we've kind of tried to balance the line between new materials and doing everything to make it look like it's really old, because it isn't, it's new. But staying within the urban fabric of the neighborhood. I think we'll stay here for a few minutes and see. I'd like to see before we dive into any of the other spaces if this is generating questions or generating comments or conversation at this point.
I know that there's been comment about the bollards. Right now you've got them painted white with green. Traditionally, we see them right now in the neighborhood as black and yellow, really an eyesore. And don't really enhance the streetscape. And the nice thing is that both Meyer and Court are not heavily trafficked. Meyer dead ends into the museum, and Court is a fairly narrow, quiet street as well. What will happen to the parking and the pickup and drop-off spaces along the museum education building? Will those still remain?
Those will be fully accessible.
And on the north side along Old Town Artisans, all those parking spots are gone?
No, they remain. The parking spaces, the 4 regular spots and 1 accessible spot maintain their position. There's a little bit of spacing challenge with them. So we're just pushing them together a little bit because there's a little extra space between them.
Is it possible, since there's still going to be the majority of parking will be on the south side along the Baker's building, to move the parking kiosk onto that side rather than right abutting a major historic structure?
It's either this corner, I guess the location is still needs to be coordinated with park wise to be finalized. This was where we want to show it, but where it actually goes is gonna have a little bit of say from the folks that run the parking program. But where else what other building were you? I mean, all of them, this area, this whole corner is the same historic building. Is there a different building that is adjacent to Meyer and Tejas that is more appropriate?
Well, no, I was just saying perhaps at the corner of the museum education building right across the street, which is a modern building. And you said that the parking where there'll be pickup and drop off for the children going to the school, you know, a lot of usage for the parking on that side, and there'll be more parking spaces on that side, whether the kiosk could be moved to that side.
Right, the parking for the drop off and the loading zone for the buses on the south side of Tejas is non-paid parking. That's temporary parking.
Okay.
So the pavement activities on the north side of the street.
And in some slides we haven't seen yet, you gave some examples of one style of pot for some of the plantings. And you can see just along Old Town that there are some heavier double fired unglazed pots that look more
terracotta look.
and there are a wide variety of styles that might be more appropriate and less modern looking than the rolled the example that is in some of your other slides. Is that a possibility to look at something that's a little bit more substantial, a little bit more quality, and be a bit more enhancing?
There is. We originally, I think, let's see if this gets me back to where I want to go. No, I think that this is a
different presentation
deck.
Well, as long as you're considering, you know,
yes, we're looking at moving to a more terracotta tone on the containers.
Thank you. Thank you. Questions about the plantings, though, which will apply to the other sites that we're looking at as well. Who is going to maintain those as plants? Some thrive, some don't. Who are going to replace those as we come to the winter time and we have freezes? Who is going to monitor that, replace that?
Ultimately, as far as this permit and review process goes, there will be, before any of this can be built, agreements will be in place for maintenance and upkeep. Either individual owners of, let's say for the slide I'm on here currently, you know, the Presidio Museum may say we have staff to water those trees and or the landscape that's being enhanced right in front of their building. Otherwise, this is going to fall on, I believe, Rio Nuevo's being the signing entity to be the ones taking control of some of these items. So that, I guess ultimately my bottom line is before this gets built, those agreements will be in place, whether it's the owner, Rio Nuevo, Downtown Tucson Partnership, Old Town Artisans and La Cocina ownership, you know, those agreements will be in place.
Excellent. Going back to the slide with the streetscape for along Old Town Artisan, for those who haven't seen the presentations before, one of the proposals that you mentioned, Chris, was that there is vegetation in the ground. I think it's pyracantha, some sage, some other drought-tolerant plants that are in the ground along the border between Old Town Artisans and the part of the courtyard of La Cocina. And you had talked about removing those and putting in planters with trellises. It's really difficult when you have plants that are drought tolerant and that are mature and that exist there to consider taking them out. They may need some grooming, but I'd like to suggest that you consider leaving those.
We actually just met with that ownership group today, and I think there was a consensus that material is overgrown and may be beyond being pruned back. The concern with that material is that it is overgrowing the sidewalk and making the sidewalk inaccessible at this point for anyone in a chair or mobility situation. So, and it being directly across and adjacent to the only mobility or accessible parking space in this area is a concern. And making sure.
Can I ask a
100%.
question here? It's Drew Cook here.
Go nuts, Drew.
Regarding that, are we looking at redoing all the sidewalk aprons? Because I know this neighborhood well, and it is, those aprons from the street onto the sidewalk are not up to snuff at all. So is that a part of the scope of this work?
It is not. Rio Nuevo's funding source and funding I would say criteria, but I can't think of a better word at this point, does not involve doing infrastructure, as they call it, for sidewalk curbs or accessibility improvements. If there's something that's totally destroyed that is inhibiting the function or the ability of an element that we're proposing to be installed, there's ability to have that repaired or replaced. But replacing the accessibility corners, curbing, fixing potholes, doing things like that is not within their scope of what they're willing to fund.
Mhm.
And
I
then
think it's
secondly,
going to be-
my
I'm
other,
sorry.
oh,
Go ahead.
Can I
but
ask one more
on the
question?
Same topic, on the same topic, Drew, it's going to be very difficult to put all this lovely painting down unless there is some repair. I walk this almost every day, and it's really rough in some places. But I'm assuming that probably that will all be taken care of before the painting is done. Certainly.
Well, it's kind of one of the pros of using a surfacing like painting, that it just becomes part of that fracture, part of that texture of what's there. Other painting projects in the area maybe have done a minor crack sealing, but not major asphalt redos to have that application put down.
Stephen, this sounds like something that is under the purview of the transportation department, and
Yes.
whether we approach those, our council person, or whether it's something that you can pursue, because to spend $500,000 and do not have safe crosswalks and surfaces, that should be something the city needs to take care of before this project goes forward.
Am I allowed to speak?
Please.
Yeah, Chris and I have been interfacing with DTM. We're trying to line up the schedules for every single neighborhood is going to get paved in the next 10 years. That project list is also decided by a board like y'all. So they have already chosen the next, I guess the next 2 or 3 year projects. So your neighborhood isn't scheduled to start. So at this point, we decided that we have so much time between the start of this and when that happens, that we can kind of enjoy this before that pavement happens, because that pavement could go to year 9 or 10. It could be in the 2030. So yeah.
Siri, did you have a question a moment ago?
I did. Thank you. Thank you, Chris, for that overview. I think in order for me to be able to offer some useful feedback, I'd need a clear statement of what the design goals are. So for instance, activating El Presidio is a wonderful kind of overarching idea, but it's not clear, or it's not detailed enough in terms of stating exactly what it is you're trying to achieve. So for instance, is it the addition of exterior lighting to make nightlife more safe? Is it the addition of shade trees to cool down a pedestrian experience? Is it to create bike paths, or, so some kind of clear statement that outlines what it is you're trying to do. That could help me calibrate my comments to be of assistance.
Well, this project is really all about marketing La Cocina, Ceres, the Presidio Museum, and Old Town Artisans to bring more patrons in and to improve their business. And that's why Rio Nuevo is spending $500,000 on this project.
Ultimately, an activation project like this is kind of all the things that you just mentioned. What I'd say, instead of trying to figure out a full-on 3-sentence mission statement off the top of my head, it's more about creating and enhancing the existing structure and spaces that are there to create a more vibrant and visual space to make people not come, but make a more enjoyable space for people to actually be in already. So it's neighborhood oriented, but it's also oriented in a way to create a space where people stop and linger, but don't loiter, and utilize the retail environment that is already existing. So whether that's enhanced seating, creating some shade, or creating some lighting, yes, all of those things. It's creating a little bit more of a pedestrian oriented environment with a little less emphasis of the vehicle, or creating a little slowing down of the vehicle in order to create a little more feeling of safety. At the same time, celebrating what's already here and the kind of context and character of what is already in place. It's not trying to create a new thing. It's just trying to add a little more to what's there already. The intent of this is that these are not necessarily permanent improvements, that these are tools to be used to create a little bit of excitement, a little bit of activation, maybe a little bit more of what I say, keeping up with the Joneses, that this will spur private development or private enhancement of existing development or existing properties to, hey, that worked over there. I'm going to join the club and do this at, X, Y, or Z also, and offer that improvement to my patrons. And maybe some of this stuff does become more permanent and become, gets redone or gets done in a more permanent way. Does that give you a kind of an overview of what we're looking to set the stage, right? Of having a neighborhood play, right? These aren't meant to be changing anything or making anything
But they are.
drastically different. It's more to enhance what's there and to show it off a little bit.
Excuse me just a minute. I think Drew would like to speak.
Yeah, we Drew had a second question. We all jumped in and kind of forklift, so he's going to sandwich the questions front and back.
Well, maybe I can tie this into what you're doing over here, but I'm just thinking about that. I know that you're working with some of the neighbors here, and I don't know how you've representing the neighbors and how you've communicated with them, but I'm thinking at this particular corner where you're showing this, as well as where you showed your first sort of pop-up and in front of Dandelion, the TMA has a huge art sale 2 times a year that basically shuts down this entire quadrant of the neighborhood. And I'm just wondering, have you sort of compared to how the TMA operates and then how maybe this new application will interact with what they do? Because I mean, they take up that entire street right there. What is that? Court. And then they come down right here and around the corner, and then they end up onto their own property. And I was just wondering have you addressed this with TMA at all? Just curious, because they're the biggest user of this space, I think.
Yeah,
Every year.
directly. TMA has been involved in this process. They've seen the progress of these ideas and planned spaces a few times. Actually, if I can scroll here, there's actually this space and so here we're standing right. Can you guys see my cursor? Am I in full view, or do you guys have cursor? Okay. We were standing right here looking back that way. So there is a little bit of work here in that existing brick where there's 2 bike racks that are pretty underutilized, creating some active spaces in there for under those shade trees that can be a connection with these. And also TMA asked or gave the kind of direction that this connection to Alameda through their property to this work area is an important space. So they were wanting us to activate that and create some sort of link to draw people through their space. So yeah, I'd say the long and short answer to your question is yes, Tucson Museum of Art's involved in this process. Have we programmed out how their larger festival activities interact with this? Not necessarily, but that's kind of part of the whole process, right? Is creating spaces that can work with that. And then yes, there may need to be some changes in the programming a little bit of their, there's gonna be 2 big planter pots and some bike parking in their area that they currently use. It's just the way it goes.
Other comments before we go on,
I would comment if I may.
please?
I sat with Cami and the new CEO of TMA at the City Hall review on August 1st, that 5:30 session and the 4 o'clock session. And TMA fully endorses this effort. I heard that personally.
There's a couple, they're a major player in this project, really, and we've kind of tried to keep them in the loop and involved in getting their. My office is right next to the train station, so to let that train go by. So they've been involved in communication with us, and we've been involved in communication with them to make sure that anything that we're planning to do that may impact their property is understood and known.
If there are no more questions, feel free to continue, Chris.
Well, I want to see really kind of I'm going to kind of go through some of these sites. I'll stay close to these front ones. I want to explain a little bit what you're looking at as far as color and textures on these plans. That the colors, the blue, the green, the yellow are not necessarily they're graphic representations. So the yellow doesn't necessarily denote that whole space is yellow. It's just identifying different uses of the painted product that we're looking at. So there's sidewalk uses, there's traffic calming uses, there's decorative uses that are really there just for to highlight certain ideas or certain spaces. So the one thing that we got feedback from one of our original presentations was we had just had too much stuff going on in the street, and there was too much going on. So we've kind of backed away from that, made it a little more pedestrian oriented, that if we left painting in the roadways, cars are going to drive on it. It's not going to be a durable product for a very, very, very long time. So having it up on pedestrian sidewalks in areas where cars aren't going to be going anymore is definitely a better use of that product and can make its longevity better. Some other ideas were in these spaces. If you hear this reddish brown, there's some areas where you have sidewalks and curbs and sidewalks and planter walls that are separated by just a small little bit of space, like 8 inches, 10 inches, 15, 16 inches. We feel it'd be a good opportunity in those areas where you have a higher pedestrian activity to bring a brick paver into that area and make that surface a little smoother, a little less ankle twisty. There's another site on here at the museum where there's a proposal to remove a bunch of brick out of the right of way, and we feel we have enough of that left over to reuse in other spots around here. Keep that. I mean, it's a fairly traditional material in the Tucson market. It's a traditional material in, Presidio and in downtown. So we feel it's a good fit for that, instead of just trying to pour more concrete, that we just don't think concrete's really the right answer. Even though it would be technically the right answer, it's a little cheaper and it probably hold up longer, but we feel the brick's probably the better answer. So we have, we have some opportunities for, some shade trees. The sitting area outside Presidio Museum is covered. There's gonna be some furniture in there that's movable, so the museum staff will take chairs and tables in and out. It's intended to be more of a front door, front room foyer of the museum, where tour groups could congregate, meet up, do their thing like that. It's a space more dedicated to that. The bakery on the corner has a little bit of improvement around it to give them a little extra space to allow their patrons to stop and stay instead of walking out, getting back in their car and going away. They're actually able to now stay somewhere in the neighborhood, stay close by. So that's the idea for most of these spaces, is those three things: seating, a little bit of shade, defining spaces with color, and creating spaces where people can stop and linger. See if mine goes the right way this time. So you see Tejas, we were looking at that space again while we were down in here. It's a couple benches, some planter pots, planters along that one strip we talked about at the accessible spot, adding some lighting to create a little bit of more dynamic space into the early evenings. And celebrating the retail, celebrating some of the doors, and creating some spaces on the corner, especially on the corner here, around that big door. That's one of the main doors in and out of that facility. So it's kind of the theme moving over and over again, is this creating spaces, creating ideas of trying to slow the cars down, make it more people friendly, create parking for bicycles where there's just loading zones. That kind of use of space is going to be important. Moving forward, I think changing the paradigm of how people talk about internal downtown spaces. This one, see if I can zoom in on this still. I don't think it's going to let me.
Was there a question or a comment? Excuse me just a minute, Chris.
Yeah, I heard someone else pipe up too.
Yeah, I'm respecting Drew's hand, which is up, and then I did have a question.
Sorry, I didn't take mine down. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's becoming much more clear, Chris. Thank you for that more detailed statement. So I'm looking at this through the lens of being on this board of historic preservation. And so the first question I have is, I understand that you said that you'd like to be mindful of not creating environments that are gimmicky or fake. I appreciate that. But would you speak to the historic quality of each of these 8 or 7, the historic quality of each of these 7 areas, and how you're responding to them, even if it is ignoring it and proposing something more contemporary? So that's the first question, is speak to the historicity of what's existing before you propose something new. The second is, with regard, I also really appreciate your attempt to adaptively reuse the no longer in use parking meters. It does seem questionable, and that's not a bad thing, it's just questionable, that the parking meters would then become what?
Did you
To,
freeze?
sorry,
I think you froze there for just a minute. The parking.
I'm sorry.
The parking meters would then become, and I think we lost you for a moment after that.
I apologize. Hello?
Siri, Siri,
Technology.
I think Siri.
There we
maybe-
go.
There she
Now
is.
you're back.
Yeah,
We lost the last
Yeah.
sentence or two.
yeah, okay, so with regard to the parking meters, perhaps perhaps the parking meters don't become what determine the rhythm of the lighting. The meters are relatively new, kind of dislocated element from the historicity of the neighborhood. Does that make sense? And can you even hear me?
Yes, that makes sense. And there are other spaces here. Let's see if she comes back.
Huh.
I was hoping it wasn't just me.
No, I think that Siri's back with us again. Siri, we keep losing you. Could you just repeat the last sentence or two? And are you on mute now?
Yeah, actually, Chris, if you could just speak to her historic.
To the historicity.
I think I got what she was looking at, was that adaptive reuse was a kind of a positive element, but I'm adapting reuse into a setting that isn't necessarily historic at all, right? Like parking meters aren't a historic feature. The rhythm and the way that they interact with the street isn't necessarily a historic character trait, right? So yes, and one, it's taking advantage of those being there. Twofold really for the adaptive part. One, if the kiosk goes away and the park at Tucson decides they want to change this whole site, or the city changes or something changes, those things are there already still. The parking meter base poles stay there. They're always, they remain in place, so they're able to be reused again. But yes, the rhythm isn't natural. It's about 40 foot, which isn't totally out of line for lighting. Lighting on a 40-foot clip isn't, totally out of the norm. But I wanted to show you this one side, this north side of Washington Street. We have some of that same lighting element proposed, and that is not exactly on the same rhythm as the parking meter poles. We stretched them out just a touch and to make them fit a little better within a couple existing trees. So that really is, it's more of the reuse was really more of the I guess the driving decision, the driving factor on those was, let's figure out a way to do that and reuse that. I'll tell you that one of the main reason we're looking at that is there's a desire to not excavate or do any digging or impact into anything beyond the surface of what we're working with. One, for historic preservation, two, for archaeological preservation, and three, just for the lighter, quicker, kind of cheaper aspect of it, that it's an easier install, right? So it's a win-win on that. It's adaptive reuse, but we don't have to actually dig new poles to put lights in to create a new rhythm, so that creates a whole nother layer of city bureaucracy that we have to go through to get those things to be added in. And we don't know if this is all going to be permanent. you know, we don't know how long these are going to stay, how long this, you know, it's Tucson, things have a tendency to stay permanent, but we're not going to make that assumption. Kind of on your first comment about like the historic quality, you know, a lot of the way we've been approaching it is to, I think the painting of the surfaces are really likely the most non-historic gesture we have going on, other than being in a street. You know, the streets are historic, but how they've always traditionally, I guess, historically been used is always been changing and evolving, right? It was horses and buggies, different types of vehicles, bicycles. They've always been mode of transportation, where I think we're moving into a new dynamic where that's changing, right? Where how we view that public space. So yeah, the historic charm and character of the neighborhood, the way we've really kind of looked at it is, I don't want to touch it. I don't want to touch the buildings. We're not going to interact with the buildings. So we're not interacting with the private property so much, except really on the Tucson Museum of Art property, which is not historic in character to the neighborhood either. So we've really tried to look at staying within what most people would consider the road. That has a lot of room for interpretation on historic, in my opinion. So, but with, you know, materials, locations of things, landscape materials, we've taken some time to really think about what those are and how we use them. Ilya, I can't tell if you're trying to raise your hand or if you're putting your hand up to the
both. I'm not really adept at the top of the screen yet. I do know that one of the things that is within our purview is to look at preservation, the character of the neighborhood. This is historically a residential neighborhood, continues to be, all the way back from pre-Hohokam, where they probably hunted and gathered and fished, down at the river, all the way through to present day, where we've got the school nearby, we've got religious activities. We used to have 5 or 6 different small markets walkable within the neighborhood. Now with fast food and busy lives and not cooking, we now have takeout and a number of lovely restaurants that we go to for food instead. But one of the concerns that I heard Terry Majewski raise at the initial commission review, as well as the subcommittee, the Streetscape and Landscape Committee, was concern about changing the feel of a living, walking neighborhood. So we want to have more participation for our lovely business neighbors, the feel that we want people to have when they come within the neighborhood, and as a historic district is as a vibrant living neighborhood, residential neighborhood. And I do know that there were some comments and concerns going back before we get to Washington, going back to court, that concerns were that the proposed large planters and the shaded area block the view of the streetscape and block the view of the historic buildings, and that that affects to some degree, again, agree or disagree, with a sense of the continuity of the residential neighborhood. Just a comment.
Yeah, I'd say I heard that comment the other night, and it's valid. It definitely is valid. We're a historic, this is a historic district. It's not singular historic building or a cluster of 2 or 3 historic buildings. It's a historic district, right? So
It's a historic neighborhood.
right. And that has legal definition tied to it, and it has, you know, concerns of protection and impacts, right? And you know, I live in Armory Park. I'm aware of historic neighborhoods and how we're always very protective of our spaces and our buildings. And yes, it's a valid concern. And you know, I'm not sure. I'm not sure there's an answer, yes or no, or pro or con. It's it's a valid concern. We're thinking of how
And
we
just
balance that, you know, that need versus the need of this project or desires of people who want to see projects like this. So.
And the other point is that when you say the street is just a roadway, I think the point made also by the other 2 reviews from the advisory board, the subcommittee, and is that the streets actually and the streetscape are the setting for all the buildings. Old Town Artisan, that one time was a major private residence that was later divided into apartments that had a shared courtyard. So they're all the way through. The buildings we look, even with adaptive use, were at one time residences. But let's go on to Washington.
I guess, yeah, you see here back.
I have a comment. Hi, I'm Holly Freitas. And just to interject a different perspective. You know, I see El Presidio as and other historic neighborhoods as a walking neighborhood, as a residential neighborhood. And when we take streets that are just really thoroughfares for cars and turn them into pedestrian walkways and outdoor environments that are shaded, I think it's a terrific improvement. And I also believe that, you know, how it happens needs to be in character with the neighborhood, absolutely. But to have, you know, as residents, the ability to walk to a cafe and sit outside in the evening, that's a very attractive attribute to living downtown. And so I do really commend this project. And I you know, understand that there might be some tension between the buildingscape and shade, but you know, being from Tucson, you can't beat shade.
I guess shade's a pretty good conversation piece, even from what we were just talking about, of through stakeholder involvement, neighborhood involvement. You know, I'm like phase 3 of this project. Like there's been multiple rounds of inquiry and thought process put into this idea. And shade has always been pretty high on the list. Shade, we need shade. But then when you start providing elements that provide shade, now they become elements that are within the fabric of the neighborhood that are not. You know, it's like there's that's what I was saying. There's this balance between the ideals and goals of what we're trying to achieve and ideals and goals of maintaining the status quo of what we have. And so there's a little bit of give and take that needs to happen. So with that, one idea that we kind of approached with all of this is even the planters, like, right, they're large, right? And they have a tree in them. Ultimately, that can be moved. Ultimately, it can be picked up, put on the back of a truck, and moved away. If this idea and these ideas ultimately fall flat and don't generate any more vitality or any more positive impact on this neighborhood, it can all be removed without a lot of effort and with basically zero impact to historic features in the neighborhood. So I think that's has to be a pretty powerful thought to what we're doing, in that we're here to generate activity, or here to generate some buzz and some places that are comfortable and places that are desirable to be in and desirable to attract people to. But there's a way we're trying to do that that doesn't become a permanent fixture unless it wants to become a permanent fixture. And then that's a whole other discussion with this type of board, in my opinion. Permanent changes to those historic areas or historic fabrics of the neighborhood are a little more deep discussions than what we're doing here. This is all surface. None of it penetrates the, you know, if something isn't quite working, it can be moved out of the way and taken away without any impact to this overall project or to the neighborhood. So the biggest one, I think, Washington Street here is as far as the neighborhood historic character, everything we've been talking about is the largest impact. This street has already been closed to vehicles. That agreement's been made. That agreement is in place. It is now a quasi functioning plaza space. So how to interact with that and how to create something in there that doesn't necessarily do everything I just talked about, doesn't negatively impact things, doesn't create permanent changes, but at the same time creates permanent changes and creates a space that people want to come to and that people want to be in. So we've had a bit of a challenge with this space.
Chris, excuse me, please. I think we have two hands up. I don't know which one went up first, but Siri, I think, has been trying to speak for a bit. Siri, can you hear me?
I can. Hopefully I can ask this question without cutting out.
Turn into a mannequin.
Yeah. I appreciate what you're saying in terms of the temporality of what you're proposing, and that trees and such can simply be moved if it doesn't work. And it's just that it will become embedded into the fabric of the city, and that's how I need to see it. That's how I need to imagine it, as an embedded quality of experience there. But I do appreciate what you're saying in terms of its temporality. So
Our ability to be temporary,
Yes. Yeah. It's superficiality, I guess, is what you were saying. Everything's superficial.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I'm interested in say, one, seeing street sections through the street, because as you know, the scale of the street can really only be better understood when it's seen planned next to section. The height of the buildings, the height of those trees at maturity, in section would be really helpful. And I know that you're doing it as you design. It would be really helpful to see as we advise or support you along the way. The other question I have is with regard to curb cuts and harvesting stormwater to feed those plants. Similar to what Brad Lancaster does in Dunbar Spring.
We are specifically asked to not provide that. Improvements that would fall under I guess let me back that up. We weren't specifically asked to not provide that. Improvements or impacts to curbs, sidewalks, or within the actual structure of the street are not part of the project.
But so that's up to interpretation, is it not? I understand not wanting to reconfigure sidewalks, streets, etc. But a curb cut to allow stormwater from the street to irrigate plantings seems like a no-brainer.
But we'd have to be creating a space for those plantings. That's what
Right.
I'm trying. We were asked to not impact outside the right of way onto private property, except for the Tucson Museum of Art property is one we're doing that. But actually, let me just, since you're on that topic, we do have one space we're doing that. So let me show you that one space. So it's not like we totally didn't do it. We just weren't looking at it. Where's my scroller? There we go. So if you know where we are here, we're at Alameda and Court, Tucson Museum of Art building. This big expansive brick that's along Alameda. There's there's a large downspout here, there's a large downspout here, and then a lot of roof runoff. So one of our idea in this space to create some shade, create a space that may draw your eye across, and to create a space where people coming from January 8th Memorial and or moving from the courthouse to be in, is to take some of that brick away and create some landscape area in that to capture some of that, utilize that water instead of having to have someone come out and water it. So yeah, so I guess there is a space for that, but within the 99% of the rest of the project, there wasn't a lot of room to be looking at curb cuts without impacting major swaths of area. Even this space, I don't know if there's opportunity for us to get a curb cut to feed it, just from a practical sense of accessibility and safety. But yes, so I was saying no, we weren't doing that at all. But we actually did. We have one space where we're actively improving landscape, and we're using roof water. So pretty much doing what you were alluding to, where we could. Otherwise, all the other plantings are above finished grade. They're in planters. They're raised up, so there's really no opportunity to capture street water.
And the idea there is that they'd be watered by a hose. So they're placed next to hose bibs.
Or we're working on agreements with Downtown Tucson Partnership, which waters pots in downtown already. And or, like at the museum or on Washington, if local, the adjacent owner would be willing to say yes, they'll walk out there every couple of days with a bucket of water or use their hose bib.
I have another question, but I'll wait until others have had a chance as well.
There was one other one I saw, but I don't think it might have gone away.
That was Ilya, but I think she took it down.
I'm waiting till we get back to Washington.
Okay. So yeah, sidetrack. We went back to here that I think that is a pretty dynamic space that's pretty harsh at this point. So that hopefully that's an improvement there.
So Siri, did you want to ask your other question then, since Ilya is going to wait?
I will wait until after Ilya.
And unless it's about Washington, go ahead and but the point about the closure of Washington, and that's a done deal. It's a done deal because we had an agreement very clearly with Caroline and Joe in considering the closures with some very specific conditions. And in the letter specifically stated by Joe and actually by Caroline in November of 2020, Caroline said, Joe and I hope to create a beautiful community space with an old world European vibe where people can feel transported to another time and space. My question is, looking at this hodgepodge of designs and uses, of street surfaces as well as very different seating elements. How is that accomplished on Washington?
Have you been to Europe lately?
Yep.
I see this everywhere I go, and I was just in Ireland, Scotland, England 3 weeks ago,
In a
Portugal
historic,
4 months ago.
so you've got artificial turf, you've got some rubberized section, you've got a game area, you've got what you described at another meeting as a Tuscany surface. You've got seating that is like a Kontiki beach cabana. You've got Parisian cafe tables. You've got awnings and shaded structures which don't indicate the type of seating that's there. There's nothing that unifies or ties that in. And this is a narrow and an important streetscape with the building of and the streetscape of El Rapido and its artwork and Old Town Artisan with the open courtyard, which again has, as you use the phrase, a plaza feel, but there's no tying in of the interior plaza connected with in design and consistency with the varied use and treatments along Washington. Do you have examples to show people of the various seatings?
The seatings are very informal. I don't necessarily have a construction detail of well, I do, but they're construction details. Let me see here. And I do have some rebuttal to that. There was a lot of, I think, nuance to the statement you just made of trying to have the space feel less connected than it currently is by naming each space with a different region of the world and of Europe. And that this space does have some continuity.
Those were your descriptions.
I don't think I've used the word Kontiki or Parisian in this presentation. There is some seating elements that are covered. There's seating elements that are less formal, that have a shade cloth covering to create more of a less casual or more casual area than a formal dining or sitting space. These were done purposefully. There's a dividing line here which connects the main door of La Cocina to the main window and service point of Sears. These are the two main retail environments that are serving beverages and food on this street. They are visually connected. They are creating the two spaces. We broke the space up into two distinct areas. One that's a little more family and group oriented and active. The other side is a little more passive, a little more smaller group, casual. You can look at this, there's a line here. This is smaller group seating, smaller seating under shade, a tree, creating a little more casual, a little more calm space, loose bistro style seating tables. This side of the development area is a little more active, a little more dense, a little more tighter because it has a little more of that family group feel. So we wanted to have those spaces be disparate and not jammed together. So you're trying to have a one-on-one two-person meal with a bunch of kids running around or with families or someone playing games. So there was a distinct reason that there's two halves to this space. And that really makes that the tying of it, is that there's the main service, food service is here, and main food and beverage service is here. That you come out, you go left or right. And that's the design decision of making those spaces two separate ideas and instead of trying to make them smaller or blend them too much. two distinct ideas being deliberately designed to achieve those spaces. The Schneiders distinctly asked for a space that was child oriented. They wanted make sure there was at least one or two distinct areas in this space that focused on families and families with small children. And that's this small area here. It has seating. It has a child's play space that's covered in shade in the middle that is connected here. This is not rubberized surface. This is just a street paint with street games, hopscotch, things of that nature on it for that age group of kids to enjoy and engage in. So there's not it's not as disjointed and hodgepodgey as it feels it is. There's distinct decisions being made as to why certain areas were left open. This space here is mandated that it stays at the delivery area. We cannot use that space for anything built. The north half of the street needs to stay no built environment. 12 feet from the curb needs to be a fire lane. We're not allowed to put anything in that space that can't be moved by hand. So if you need to move it, you have to be able to move it instantly. There's no unbolting it, picking it up and moving it. Two people have to move it. It has to be able to be moved right away. So we have some constraints and some requests by the local owner, you know, to what we could, what they wanted to see in this space. And I don't think it's as disjointed or as all over the place as being characterized.
Well, hopefully, when you have finalized your plans, you'll be able to show us the actual designs of those seating areas, the styles of the tables, and whether they connect in one way or another with the quieter and more active spaces. We'll look forward to that.
I have a question. Chris, was there any thought given to just making all the seating movable, even in that space that from this point of view looks so busy, even though you say it isn't? And I can understand that. I mean, what we're looking at is a patchwork, and it's very difficult without seeing any of the elevations to know. But those are permanent installations of what I think are wooden seating areas, sort of like picnic tables. Can you talk a little bit more about that, please?
Correct. If you look at, let's take this space in general, this space is one picnic table, two picnic table, three, four picnic tables that are not as long as a normal picnic table. They're 4-seater, so they're a little shorter, with dividers between them, creating kind of a booth seating, restaurant style booth seating feel, but with a more of a wood and steel, trying to stay natural with materials, trying to stay consistent with the materials to the other spaces around materials and spaces we've used around the rest of the areas. That's the fixed, those are the fixed seating points. These ones here are the fixed seating points. But they're also on, I mean, they're on a deck. They have shade cover over them. They're a built, the whole thing is a built structure of similar to what you see in other shared spaces in downtown. On the edges is more flexible seating. So those are all movable seats. Counter height, and then on the other side, since it's 6 inches lower, is actually now bar height. So it's a mix of bar height, counter height, but you still look at each other equal, same height, tabletop. And that's really to facilitate use of the entire space. You can have informal gathering, informal seating. It's not set structure. You can flex your seat around and move it. Majority of these are really the only fixed seats. These here are the only fixed seats in here. This one's not showing through. I thought I had a different version of this pulled up, but
Could you talk about the discussion around why making those fixed was desirable as opposed to having movable tables, maybe a little bit larger than the ones that are the bistro tables, but something that would have more flexibility for where those fixed seating areas are right now? What was the thinking around that?
The design behind the decision making behind that was really a balance between flexible and something a little more permanent or semi-permanent in its structure. For twofold. One was give a balance of maintenance and upkeep of it, that a fixed piece like that can be sprayed down, hose, scrubbed down. You don't have to maintain pulling in and out of the furniture in and out every night. This is something that the La Cocina staff is going to have to break down every evening and bring back inside to secure it. So if it was 100% flexible seating, that's just more of those pieces that they're going to have to move every day. So there was an ask for a mix of those two functions.
And am I reading this correctly? There is only one shade tree?
In this space, there was one tree, but this is covered shade. This is covered. This is all covered. So we're just using graphic colors. I mean, it's not necessarily going to be a bright purple shade cloth. You know, we used colors to kind of show different materials and different things that would be different materials. But this has a solid roof, and then this is totally one structure with a solid roof. But yeah, there's only in this space, since we weren't allowed to put anything on the north half of the road, north half of the street, and this was already covered, fully covered. This space, we tucked in the tree where we could to get a little more vegetation on that side. There's some existing vegetation along the north side, along Sierras, that's remaining. There's an existing tree, I think 2 existing trees and some existing shrubs right along the wall. So those all stay in place. No impact.
Do you have a lighting consultant helping you out with this?
For string lights?
Well, to understand what the current lighting levels are, and that when you add illumination, how much more lumens you're adding to the streetscape, to understand where there's an absence of light and where you might need more, so that you're not blanketing the street with string lights, but you're strategically placing them where it's needed.
In reality, I'm not thinking string lights are used in that manner, but that or that the amount of light being generated by a small bulb at 15 feet is anything other than a decorative light. Like the twinkle of the light is the action that is creating. It does create some ambient light, but in my experience, they're not intrusive as far as too much light. You know, does that make sense?
Well, do you have a drawing that shows the existing light poles?
No, not currently. I mean, we know where they are. I just don't have them graphically shown on this being a light pole versus a non-lighted pole.
It seems to me that would be a useful document to show existing lighting, existing trees, and then proposed lighting, proposed trees, so that we all get a sense of the overall fabric. And not just in plan, but also in section, because the heights are of crucial importance.
So just to follow up on the seating too, those wooden structures are actually in the street. They aren't going to be in the sidewalk area.
No, sidewalks are clear.
Uh-huh.
Some small benches along where we had enough actual space to get a bench along the buildings, but otherwise sidewalks are clear for mobility.
Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions before Chris continues?
Hi, this is Hal again. So I think a lot of this conversation is because we don't have, you know, sort of a streetscape to look at, that we're all conceptualizing what it might look like in our own minds. And so I think when Chris and Stephen come back with something that we can see, then this conversation, I think, will be a little more focused on you know, actual objects, because I'm thinking that what Susan sees or what I see might be very different than what this might look like. So I think that would really help this conversation the next time we meet.
Let's see if this one, I think I grabbed though, right? This turns here. There we go. Give my computer a minute. The blue wheel of death. This one has a little less formal design to it, but has the more images at the bottom. This is Washington. So here's what that was the study diagram of what that bench seating would have a feel of. A small incline metal bench with seating with the divider between, right? That's the study image of this seating area here.
So that really helps to give a visual, I think.
Right.
Kind of wrap their heads around it. And so
Right.
Thank you for that.
Right, and which presentation I'm looking at, you know, I've done this, I've had to do I've done, I think, 4 of these in the last 2 weeks. So which one I pull up and which one I use is sometimes back and forth. So that this may have been the one I should have pulled up first, but this, you know, Roman style shade back and forth over the seating area in this area is really the intent of that space, is that shade would be able to be modified depending on the sun angle of the day and or the time of the year. So it'd have a little more flexibility to it. But that, if I can bring you back to that image, that's really kind of what instead of being all wood, you know, we have a little more, we're balancing more of the tabletop surface and the seating surface being a wood material, but the structure of the form and the shape of this being weathered steel or painted steel, for durability and for a little bit more context with surrounding Tucson and surrounding neighborhood. If that helps you guys.
Yes, thank you. I mean, these little sort of nook,
thumbnails.
yeah, these little nook seating areas make a lot more sense now, because even though it's a street, it doesn't have a ton of space, so.
Right.
So
So-
this makes more sense to me, thank you.
They're small, these areas are meant, those are 4-person tables and you access them from either side. They're open on both sides, all side walls are open on these. They're not fully, these ones are kind of booth style, so that one has a wall, but the ones we're envisioning are open on both sides, so you'd be able to get in and out, service it. You'd have accessibility to them. There's space in there for someone who had accessibility issues, could be able to access these spaces equally as anyone else. So that's kind of where we're basing these on, was a model similar to this.
Yeah, looks great, thank you.
I mean, it is helpful to see the aesthetic quality you're after. But it also illuminates that, for instance, the thumbnail indicated by Washington Street group zone. I mean, that will really only provide shade when the sun is directly overhead. So as a shading element that really protects from the sun's path across the sky, which we know is, it's a path, not a point. I question its effectiveness. And also the shade sail, which is a wonderful image. But in terms of its effectiveness, we really only know if it's effective if relative to its height from the ground. So, the higher the shade sail is from the surface of the ground, the more sun that can get in. So I just, that's why this section is so important, to be able to really evaluate the effectiveness of shade, which you had stated in the beginning was of primary importance.
Yeah, I would just second that.
And I do too. But as we all know, any shade structure will hit sun at some point unless it's very deep. And in our desert sun. And so I'm not exactly sure what you mean, Siri, because these are short roofs, and so there's no way that they can be protected from sun all day long. They're
That's
not
right.
simply not deep enough. But I
That's
think
right.
a deep shade structure would raise other concerns with this group and maybe with the larger neighborhood.
Well,
Yeah.
that, just to respond to that, that was why I was wondering about, can't you use movable umbrellas? I understand having the staff have to go out and bring them in, but they're very flexible. They are relatively inexpensive to replace. They have the quality of being movable and following the path of the sun at any point. So I'm just a little confused about why these would be installed as part of the streetscape.
Actually, on that point directly, I just had that conversation with the Schneiders today. And they have movable umbrellas out there currently. And they're replacing, I think they said, in this time of year, 2 a week. If not something around that magnitude. So there's a point of return of flexibility and
fragility, right?
Fragility, and being aware of materials aren't being produced and created in a way that's super sustainable these days. Having things that are purposely easy to move or be replaced is, I'd say, not super advantageous for a business owner. We did speak about these areas here, these loose tables here of still maintaining some of that. Like, yeah, they could pull out some umbrellas and have the tables associated around some umbrellas, but that's a modification or a feature that I think they're gonna work with and add as needed or as they feel fits their space or fits the use.
Right, and I don't understand why if these built-in group zones are there, if there is sun, showing on the table and on the chairs, that you just can't bring an umbrella over for that moment. I mean, I don't understand the permanence of these group zones with some flexibility with some umbrellas. I mean, that doesn't seem like a problem to me.
Guy has his hand up. Guy?
Yes, thank you. I would like to make a brief point that those shade sails are used at the Hotel Congress Plaza patio in the back, and I believe that they're quite effective. They can be deployed or
Put
you
away.
know, put back, and I think they're very effective. I mean, it may not be the perfect application for everything. It might not work 100% of all the time for all the tables, but okay. So I just, case in point, they're used elsewhere and they seem to be fairly effective.
It's effective. It's effective if you're sitting in the middle at noon. But if you look at item 12 in the plan, the seating is flanking the perimeter of that footprint. So and that's the leakiest plate. That's the leakiest place in terms of sun exposure underneath the shade sail. So I agree. I mean, there can be a combination of techniques, shade tree with a movable umbrella and a semi-permanent structure. And if that's the strategy, great, but it should be drawn and studied as such and planned for.
I guess I'm getting mixed messages from this board at this time of, do we want, I guess I'll back that comment back, but I'm getting mixed messages as to what the goals and what the ultimate direction of comment is for this review at this time. That it seems like I'm
Let
on
me
one slide,
provide a path
I'm
forward.
hearing historical context and of impact to visible, and now we're talking about having to have 100% shaded seating that creates even more structure if it's a built, or if we take away the roofs, now we're starting to have even more things introduced: umbrellas, shade, larger shade canopies, larger umbrellas. Like it's the dynamic and the balance between those two decisions right there are giving me pause a little about what direction we have currently, what neighborhood direction we've been given so far through public outreach, public communication. There's representatives of this neighborhood that have been involved in this project from the very beginning. So I want to be clear on what this board's view is on structures.
Chris, I'd like to interrupt.
Because this one that I showed at the beginning.
Chris, this is Jody. I just want to, I just want to interrupt for a little bit. I do want to direct the board back. It seems like maybe we veered off course talking about sun access and stuff. I would agree with Chris on this. The board should be providing comments on the appropriateness of the proposed structures as it relates to the historic character of the historic preservation zone.
Thank you, Jody.
whether or not they are appropriate to the district, the materials are appropriate to the district, the placement is appropriate to the district. I would steer clear of, you know, the sun getting in or, you know, moving in that direction. Because you do want to provide succinct direction to Chris and Stephen as to what they should be looking at material wise or eliminating from there because it's too busy for the streetscape, impacts the historic streetscape. I'm just trying to veer you guys back. It seems like we may have wandered a little bit away. So with that in mind, please continue, but just keep in mind your purview is of the historic character and the appropriateness of the proposed elements to the character of the district.
Thank you, Jody.
So I kind of brought you guys back to this image to have that same conversation of that they are structures, but there's definite, you know, material here, the angle is very similar. This wood and steel is actually direct pull from an existing gate material that's right around the corner and from the historic Presidio materials they use there. So the size, scale, shape, you know, form of these ideas. So even back over on Washington, that's where we're pulling some of those ideas from. There's a lot of wood. There's a lot of metal on the roof surfacing in La Casina, in the adjacent properties. So where the materials and the forms that are being used on Washington specifically, and in this space specifically, they're not just being pulled out of the air. They're definitely direct representations or direct I wouldn't say pulls, but they're trying to be harmonious with the surrounding structures. I think Haley, I'm running the meeting.
I was just going to compliment you on this image. I wish we had one of Washington to complement it so that we, you know, moving forward, we know what we're looking at.
Yeah, I'll give a little background on that. Just contractually, our scope didn't even have images like this in it to be provided as part of the project, but we negotiated with Rio Nuevo a little extra funds to create a couple images for use with boards and commissions and panels like this one, so we get a little more idea of what. And we chose this view and the one on Tejas as representative of different forms, and had a lot of different materials and items elements that we were proposing. So we used those two images just to give you a little background why we only have two and not one of everything. These take hours and hours and hours to produce, so we wanted to be prudent.
Yeah, Jody, I appreciate you giving us some direction. I'm confused though, because the presentation entailed a lot more than just the structure. It entailed placement of trees, placement of lights, parking meters, and a variety of seating and play areas for kids. And I mean, so I guess what I'm hearing is we're to ignore that and only focus on these semi-permanent structures.
I don't think I'm saying that.
I don't think that's true.
I'm not saying that you should ignore those at all.
Okay.
I'm saying that the conversation kind of veered into, and I'm not picking on you, Siri. I don't mean to.
Not at all.
Like I'm picking on you, but it kind of seemed to have veered into a conversation of where the sunlight goes throughout the day. And maybe you should have a wider umbrella for the sunlight. That's really not speaking to like what are they proposing if it's appropriate. That brings you more into the realm of you're trying to design the project.
Understand.
So you're not designing the project, you're just providing comments. Is it appropriate? Is it not appropriate given the historic context? So you can speak to the play equipment, you can speak to the trees, you can speak to the planters, you can speak to the colors. It's just, you don't want to design.
Yes, I understand that. And the comments that I was making with regard to sunlight was directly related to the provision of shade. And if I see something that's not actually providing shade in an intense, hot climate, then I have an objection to the design. So anyway, I don't need to belabor that point. I think I've made it. So, but with regard to this image here on the screen, and we've been asked to assess its appropriateness. I agree that the roof types are similar, but I don't see how the material palette is of the neighborhood. In fact, it looks like it's the only wood steel structure here.
And that was the opinion also of the subcommittee from the commission, that it disrupts the flow and the sight lines, and that it's not consistent in maintaining the character of that street, which is a series of residences regardless of their use and their new applications.
I will say this image right here in the center of this panel here.
You need to remember that the Presidio Museum is a recreation.
Just showing you, it's directly adjacent to that. So that's where that materiality came from. There's this large element here that has these materials. We're using those here directly adjacent to it. Same with that Washington Street La Casina. There's materials there that are informing that decision. We don't want to totally mimic the adjacent. We want to use those as direction, things to harmonize with, but not to directly mimic. Where, yes, we're going to use some weathered steel and some wood, but it's not going to look at this exact. It's just the material patterning. These are materials that are being used in the area and have been used in the area traditionally. I guarantee there's wood and steel in El Presidio neighborhood. There are trees in El Presidio neighborhood. Street paint? No, I guarantee there's no street paint in El Presidio neighborhood. Well, maybe there is in front of someone's house, but that's really the newest element. You know, the materials are traditional Tucson materials of weathered steel, some weathered wood, inobtrusive metal benches, larger container pots. We're moving more towards that terracotta. We are already moving in that direction. I'd really like to keep the focus of this conversation, you know, with an hour 40 into it, on streetscapes, or if there's long range vistas or overall context and tone of the neighborhood that's being affected. Individual material choices, I'm gonna beg to differ that these materials aren't represented in El Presidio neighborhood. There's a whole lot of stucco and steel and wood in this neighborhood.
Are there any other comments?
I think that in the photo, the planters, you know, they're not weathered yet. They look very modern. They look very contemporary. And I think that once they're weathered, you know, they would fit into the neighborhood. I do, just one more comment. This was back, I think Ilya had mentioned, to cover some of these historic buildings with things is a shame in some ways, but I understand what the overall goal is. And so it is a little controversial, or there's some internal conflict even when I look at these plans. And it is a give and take. What's the goal? How much do we keep? I don't think we want to junk up the neighborhood with a bunch of banners on poles. That looked a little offensive to me, but you know, overall, and it was just shocking for me to see some of these buildings that I walk by almost every day, but yet the benches, the tree, you know, it will be nice. So I do think that if we get down to these little tiny details, we could be here all night. This is just a preview, right?
Well, and I appreciate your comments, and I do want to I want you all to understand that I do take the comment process seriously, and that we aren't done with these.
No.
These are definitely in process and they're in progress. They're not far from being done. That's why we're doing these reviews, is that if there's things that need to pivot, now's the time to pivot. And if this body is saying planters with trees within the curb or built structures within the curb are not going to fly, then we're taking 2 steps back and we're starting over. Then I need to know that information. So I'm kind of asking for a line in the sand as to what you guys think is or is not necessarily appropriate, without getting into you know, some really nuanced material or shade angles again. You know, that there's elements on here, you know, we were just looking at this photo. There is structure within this space that could be a truck or a car. Is that, you know, I want to pull it down even down to the brass, the bottom line denominator of that is a truck or a car better use of that space, or a shaded element that benefits the museum and the historical use of that museum building? You know, that I think is part of the conversation, you know.
And it also slows traffic. I mean, I think that's an important point as well. You know, so.
You know, and I don't want you to get so hung up on this image having brighter wood. You know, we're dealing with computers and graphics and you know, we have limitations as to what we have available to us. You know, are these going to be white and green? No, they're probably going to be whatever color we all agree on, and what Tucson Department of Transportation and Mobility allows us to install. You know, that they're ultimately going to have the final say on all of this, because they have to take the risk of allowing cars and people to interact within the same space. So there's some things we can move, some things we can change, there's some things we can't. And there's some things we can just totally take off the plate because we can't get it approved.
Thank you, Chris. I understand the complexity of having to come before so many different groups with so many different preferences.
That's what I do. That's why I'm here. So I don't take any of it personally.
That's great. That's great. I would just ask for a reconsideration of the absolutely fixed materials of those picnic tables with the shed roofs. I don't know if anybody besides me finds those problematic. And this committee does work by votes, although this is a courtesy review. I take it that we're not going to be voting, but
I agree with your take on it, Susan. I don't think that they really fit into the street. I don't think that they reference the street. Washington is a very small, narrow, intimate street. And I would prefer to see something that was more integrated in design on both sides, meeting the needs of groups, meeting the needs of families, and meeting the needs of more quiet dining. I think that can all be done, but I would like to see more cohesiveness in the integration of the different types of seating and shading, et cetera.
Do any of the others of you who are listening in have comments related to that issue? I think busyness is what comes to mind when I see those designs. There are so many different treatments, elements. I understand some of the rationale for it, but anything that's permanent is going to affect the streetscape permanently.
Right, so Susan, this is Holly. I value your opinion enormously. They didn't bother me, and they looked like comfortable spots for 4 people to sit. That wasn't that was compact. So for me, I didn't find them offensive. So just, I mean, you asked for other opinions, and so I'm giving you mine.
Thank you.
Yep.
I think the question on those, the shed with the benches and the tables, are they historical to our area?
Oh,
I'm not sure if they are or not. I can understand the utility, certainly. But, and maybe they are. I may not know enough to know that they kind of look like farming or something. I don't know, but aesthetically, if they're appropriate and historically, more or less correct.
I think that
I don't want us to look like Europe either. We are not Europe. This is Tucson. This is Tucson. And historically, if we can preserve anything at all with trying to be updated a little bit and appealing to people, and generating more activity and fun. But we're Tucson. This is Tucson. It's different from any place else on earth, I think. And that's what I'd like to preserve, that. And business is business. I understand that as well. And there are businesses, those are businesses on Washington. So I also understand their concerns too. It's not easy. This is not easy. So Chris, I'm glad I'm not you.
I appreciate your comments that way. That
I had a
But-
comment about those structures. To me, can you guys hear me?
yes,
Okay, to me, they seem a little bit cumbersome and bulky for what they accomplish. I sort of thought that that personal dining experience might be able to separate the spaces with something lighter that's not as heavy and intrusive. So otherwise, overall, the plan, I appreciate what you're doing. You're creating intimate spaces for pedestrians, and hopefully that'll result in more events in the neighborhood to make it more pedestrian friendly. So also realize we don't need to solve every problem right now. As far as shade and lighting, well, I think proprietors have been in business. They'll adapt to whatever situation comes up. Different times of year when it's sunny, or proprietors, business owners are pretty flexible in how they handle problems. So might leave some of that to them. So okay, that's all I had.
thanks, Alex.
Anyone else like to speak to this? Okay. Going on. We can proceed.
Where do we want to proceed? Let me see here. We want to look at more of these spaces because there's several more of them. Let's see, this is the other one this is the Alameda and Main Avenue. If you know, this property is a little plaza space off the corner of the Tucson Water. And really the intent here is to actually remove some paving, create a little more dynamic landscape space, and create, you know, a little bit of seating under existing trees, and introduce a small art element to start introducing the art of the neighborhood, and that there's a lot of existing mural art in the area, so kind of pulling that a little up, more up onto the street, be more highly visible. And introducing an element of some Presidio marker for the neighborhood gateway, where that's still in development. So it's pretty light touch, but I think higher impact in here as far as creating softer space, removing paving. And starting to create a gateway effect into the neighborhood proper. Six, we looked at a little earlier. It's more of a connection between Alameda and Tejas into the main neighborhood. So pretty light lift here also, mostly street or, you know, paint activity, moving brick around a little bit. But mainly just creating a visual draw, wayfinding to draw people through from Presidio Plaza, past the donut, and into the neighborhood proper through the museum, through the museum space, creating a couple seating areas in there for folks to stop and rest under those nice shade trees. There is another space over at the corner of Transamerica building. A very similar idea there. It's creating that visual character, visual motif of materials. So you got some benches, planters, seating, landscape material that'll start drawing your eye from library, YMCA area, and introducing those ideas towards the neighborhood and creating some wayfinding with some signage to introduce the neighborhood, introduce that it's kind of a threshold gateway area per se, to help pull people and move people into the neighborhood and define the edges of it. These last few spaces really are that same motif. They're a lighter lift. There's less actual built material. There's less long-term imposition to the space. It's more of a fresh up. Let's add some landscaping. Let's add some color. Let's add some materials, because there's the materials existing throughout this area in downtown and in the Presidio are kind of all over the place as far as benches, containers, you know, plant material. So we're doing our best to kind of introduce those themes and create a consistency throughout the space. Over at Hakame Plaza, there's the existing seat walls that are there that, again, maybe we're looking at some turf removal, create a little more accessible space, bring in some nightlight in here, and a bunch of shade trees to create shade into that space. We think those walls are traditionally underutilized, and you know, they have a little lighting element in them already, and embracing that corner and creating a reason to be drawn to that direction is what we're after. The big kind of design idea, and my idea is in this space, is this red area. This space is already Adopt a Park sponsored by City High School. So we're gonna try to communicate with them and get some programming that maybe they take over that middle space and do some tile art or some tile memorializing of their school and of downtown. Those projects tend to be very successful and have a pretty good neighborhood impact and community impact. And so we're seeing if we can get this project to generate that activity. And I think the last space that we have to look at is the
Last space.
the
That's the last one there.
El Charro block. So this one's cut in two. We have the north side of the street and the south side. And most of this is really just about activating the corners and working with the parking lot to activate a mid-block area of
Turn that light on,
seating,
Excuse me,
some
just a minute.
planters.
Alex, would you please mute your,
yeah. I will, again.
sorry.
That's
Go ahead,
fine.
Chris.
You know, there's not a lot we can do in this space. We really just have the sidewalk area, but we're negotiating pulling in a couple spaces, 4, 5, 6 parking spaces in the middle of the block. We create that community space of not just straight El Charro, but there's a couple businesses, there, architecture group, and I think there's another within this building here. There's what BWS, and there's another group. Having them in this parking lot, having a foil to that a little bit. So it's pretty light impact in this area, but I think the actual impact of the area is pretty strong in that I think it'll create a visual draw to this area more than just El Charro, and create that funnel down to the neighborhood of people making it to that El Charro area and be like, what do I do? What happens if I follow this road to the south? Where do I end up? And they'll end up over at Old Town.
Has the IDA committed to funding that? Because that's out of the Rio Nuevo district.
It is outside the Rio Nuevo district, and there is a commitment for some funding. How much that funding ends up being is still in negotiation. So this space does have some variability and or some potential. Is it all going to happen or not all happen? We don't know yet.
Right.
But this one has a lot of the same elements. Some using color and pattern to define space, planters, whether round or rectangular, to define an edge and give a little bit of a border, a little bit of a verticality. Similar idea to Tejas, using the existing meters as light pole bases. Create some dynamic space along that whole block without impacting raised parking. I think that's really the last space we've looked. I think we've looked at all the other ones and gone through them. They're all very, very. Once you get out of Washington and Court, they're all very similar in that they're more landscape. I'd say characterized by more of a landscape base and more of a creating just a different visual aesthetic than what's there currently. By either removing asphalt or landscape or concrete, adding or building a little bit better of a plaza space, refreshing existing areas, and then on the second level of creating a consistent material choice. So planter pots, seating benches, rectangular planters, all those starting to become a consistent model throughout all 9 spaces.
Good.
So
Go ahead, Siri, sorry.
okay. in addition to the comment in that we're advising a reconsideration of those structures on the street, I'd also ask for a reconsideration of the lighting scheme, especially as they incorporate the existing parking meters.
Is it the rhythm that's catching you on that, or the spacing, or what's the?
Yeah, so I'm coming from it from the point of view of being on the historic board, and I don't see the connection between using the parking meters, which speak to a component of the street that we don't necessarily, or that we're not necessarily embracing in these neighborhoods. So to keep a piece of that alive by then putting new lighting on top of it, basically, making a relic out of it, it just doesn't seem appropriate to me at this point. So I'm just requesting that that be reconsidered. And then to your question regarding rhythm, yes, I do think that lighting a pedestrian experience can come from the height of a human, the height of a group of people walking down a street, the scale of the street, the width of the street relative to the height of the buildings, the existing lighting that's happening there, and the absence of lighting, which determines where new lighting could go. That those things determine where light is placed rather than the meter of the existing parking meters that are no longer in use. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. I guess I'd counter that the opposing conversation that would be leaving a relic of a cutoff pole on the curb and adding more infrastructure to add a pole at a different space may honor that meter more. And that the intent of the lighting isn't necessarily to illuminate or create a new experience. It's to create a visual impact, a little more visual impact than, it's not necessarily functional lighting in that
Wow.
sense that you were describing. It's
Wow.
lighting to create that visual. So within the context of this board, that's where I could see there being a challenge to string lighting in this context.
Okay, then I ask that the lighting be reconsidered such that an acknowledgement of the existing historic lighting is considered. And where existing light levels are too dim, where it's unsafe, that new lighting be added to increase the aesthetic delight of the street as well as the safety. Is that clear?
Yeah, sure.
That seems more than reasonable. One of the big concerns was that Tejas and parts of Court are very poorly lighted at night, and we're a walking neighborhood, so a lot of people are out in the evenings, and it's a little concerning walking through the darker areas.
Right. I would say that the purview or the direction of this project that we've been provided so far, not that I agree with it, has been if it's an issue or a challenge that would traditionally be solved or remedied by the city, that it should be solved and remedied by the city.
Mm-hmm.
This project is not being utilized to remedy safety accessibility or infrastructure inconsistencies within the neighborhood. So I'll take that into consideration on that, but you know, looking at existing lighting and using this project to fill in gaps in existing lighting is an opportunity, but it's not going to be the sole use of lighting on this project unless there's another reason to not use lighting.
Are there other comments or questions? Well, thank you very much, Chris, for joining us and staying with us long enough for us really to thrash through some of these issues that concern us. I want to go back to something that Siri said that I think is the most important of all, and Jody was making that point earlier as well. Our concern with this committee is historic appropriateness for this neighborhood, and anything that contributes to that, enhances it, that's wonderful. Things that take away from it or are inappropriate to it, that's something that we have reason to be concerned about. So I think you've heard our comments. Is there anybody else who'd like to make further remarks before we conclude? Jody, are you still there?
Oh yeah, I'm still here.
Still on the beach.
Still on the beach, yes.
Have you got anything to add?
I do not have anything to add. This is, as you mentioned, a courtesy review. And Chris and Stephen are fully aware that they will have to come back for formal review with you and the plans review subcommittee, and it probably would behoove them to go back to the historic landscape subcommittee because they had some questions. So you'll be seeing this project again.
Great. Thank you very much. And thanks to everybody for persevering through this quite long discussion. Chris, thank you for your presentation. I think we will have a motion to adjourn. Is there someone who would so move?
Hey.
Is there a staff update, Jody?
Thank you, Ilya. Yes, there are a couple staff updates. So I've been updating everybody kind of along the way about the commission split. We do have a memo. We are tentatively expected to go to a study session with mayor and council on September 6th. In theory, they're going to get the agenda out for that. I will send a copy of the memo to you that has been dispersed already to the commission and to mayor and council, and I will get you a link to the mayor and council meeting or the agenda so you can attend. I think the mayor and council is now doing it in person, so that if you would like to attend to see that information, you're welcome to do that.
Let you all look at each other again. Yeah, forgot I was still sharing screen.
Oh, and the other thing is too, we have also been kind of doing some hybrid meetings. I'm not going to force a hybrid meeting on you, but I want to put it out there. If you are interested in a hybrid meeting, if we do have a hybrid meeting, we have to have it someplace, one, where there is Wi-Fi, and two, where there is the ability to project the plans, because we will not be going back to paper plans. The city has moved on from that, and we are all now electronic. So in the hybrid meeting that we have had for Fort Lowell, we've had the ability to project on the wall to have the discussion with the plans. So I'm just putting that out there. You don't have to give me an answer, but thinking about it, if you guys want to go back to hybrid, kind of in-person hybrid meetings, that's an option. We just have to work out where to do it.
Great.
And really, those are my staff updates.
Thank you. Would somebody make a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
I'll
Second that.
Ilya moves and Anita seconds. So is there any question? Final questions? Okay, let's vote to adjourn then. How many of you agree to adjourn?
Aye.
I.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Great. Is Drew still with us?
Yes.
I'm here.
Okay. And I take it that you're ready to adjourn too?
Yes.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thanks,
Thank you.
Chris.
Thank you, thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Bye-bye.